What would you do on your 3-year wedding anniversary? Imagine excitedly carrying a cake home, only to find your mother cowering, bound and gagged to a chair by your husband and best friend, being brutally beaten to force her to sign over the house deeds. That was the hell Skylar Reed faced on that bitterly cold, rainy Chicago night. He thought she was just a regular cop, weak and easy to bully. He laughed, insulted her, and even beat her within an inch of her life right in front of his mistress. But there was a deadly secret the despicable husband didn't know. The wife he was trampling wasn't just another officer. She was the cherished only daughter of one of the country's most decorated army generals. The cake box fell, and with it, the facade of her perfect life shattered. 10 minutes later, as sirens wailed and dozens of SWAT team rifles aimed at their heads, would the treacherous husband still be smiling? This tale of revenge will send shivers down your spine. The December winter rain pierced like icy needles through the dim yellow streetlights, biting into the skin of passers-by. At 11 p.m., the city curled up against the biting cold. High-rise buildings were shrouded in a thick, murky fog, indistinct and chilling. Homicide detective Skylar Reed stepped out of her squad car, her leather boots still caked with mud from a crime scene, dragging across the polished lobby floor of her luxury apartment building. Her entire body ached, every muscle screaming after 3 sleepless days and nights spent tracking down a criminal. But in her tired, dark eyes, a strange, warm light still flickered. In her hand, carefully shielded from the drizzle, was a small cake box tied with a red ribbon. Today was her 3-year wedding anniversary. 3 years. It wasn't a long journey, but it was enough for a tough detective like her to believe she had found a peaceful harbor. She thought of her husband, Ethan Blackwood, a businessman with a gentle, academic air, who always made her a hot cup of cocoa when she returned late from an overnight shift. The thought of his kind smile made the bone-chilling cold outside seem to melt away. Skylar smiled faintly, imagining how surprised Ethan would be to see her home earlier than expected. He would playfully scold her for being a workaholic, and then they would cut the cake together under the shimmering candlelight. The hallway of the luxury apartment building was silent, save for the soft echo of Skylar's footsteps. Standing before the thick oak door of her apartment, Skylar reached to punch in the code, but her hand froze mid-air. The door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly ajar, revealing an unusual, sickly yellow light. It wasn't the warm glow of the living room lamp she was used to, but a harsh, unsettling light. A chilling premonition ran down her spine. Her detective's intuition tightened her heart. She held her breath, pressing her ear to the crack in the door. There was no romantic music, no television drone. Instead, she heard the crash of objects and faint, muffled moans, as if someone's mouth was covered. "Sign it, you stubborn old woman," I said. "Sign it now." A shout echoed, familiar yet alien. It was Ethan's voice, but not his usual warm, gentle tone. It was a growl, savage, brutal, and impatient. Skylar felt her chest constrict. She pushed the door open, and the scene before her eyes was so brutal and raw it froze her, rooting her to the doorstep. The living room, which she had meticulously decorated with every flower vase and painting, was now a war zone. Shards of glass were scattered across the polished wooden floor. In the center of the room, on the armchair her father used to love reading in, sat her mother, Eleanor Vance. The 60-year-old woman, who had spent her life hard-working, elegant, and kind, was now bound tightly to the back of the chair with Ethan's own neckties. Her mouth was stuffed with a crumpled handkerchief, silencing any cries for help, only choked, muffled sounds escaping her throat. Her gentle face was swollen, one cheek bruised purple, the corner of her mouth bleeding, her eyes wide with terror and brimming with tears. Standing before her was Ethan, Skylar's supposedly exemplary husband, holding a thick stack of documents and slamming them onto the glass coffee table. The sharp clang made one shudder. His shirt was disheveled, sleeves rolled up, revealing veins bulging with rage, his face red and distorted by greed. But what tore Skylar's heart into pieces didn't stop there. Lounging on the armrest of the opposite sofa, with an arrogant, disdainful posture, was Tiffany Hayes. Her best friend from college, the person Skylar had trusted with all her joys and sorrows, whom she had cherished like a sister. Tiffany was wearing a flimsy silk slip, a half-smoked cigarette clutched between her fingers, her red lips curled into a sneer as she watched Eleanor's agony. "Easy there, Ethan. If she faints, who will sign the transfer deeds for you? That old mansion is worth tens of millions. Don't mess this up." Tiffany exhaled a plume of white smoke, her voice seductive but laced with venom. Ethan turned, his eyes bloodshot with savage fury. "This old witch is more stubborn than I thought. I've beaten her this much, and she still won't pick up the pen. Does she think her daughter will come home in time to save her? Right now, she's busy playing hero out on the streets, probably doesn't even remember the way home." He turned back, grabbed Eleanor's hair, yanking her head back, and pressed his face close to hers, hissing, "Listen, I'm out of patience. Sign the house transfer deeds and the power of attorney over the company's finances now. Otherwise, don't blame this son-in-law for being cruel. You want to keep this inheritance for your daughter, huh? Sorry, but everything that belongs to Skylar will soon belong to me." Every word from Ethan was like a sledgehammer blow to Skylar's eardrums. The cake box in her hand slipped. The box hit the floor, its lid popping open. The cake, covered in smooth white frosting and decorated with plump red strawberries that Skylar had meticulously chosen, now lay smashed and scattered across the cold tiles. The white frosting mixed with dirt, looking as pathetic and distorted as the marriage she had once revered. The sound wasn't loud, but in the tense silence, it echoed like an explosion. All movement in the room froze. Ethan and Tiffany simultaneously turned towards the door, their eyes locking. On one side, the stunned horror and fear of villains caught red-handed. On the other, the profound pain, the collapse of trust, and a tsunami of rage surging within the wife and daughter. Skylar stood there, rainwater still dripping from her hair onto her pale face. She looked at Ethan, the man she had kissed goodbye that morning, the man she had vowed to spend her life with. Now, before her was not her husband, but a demon in human form. Her gaze slid from Ethan's shameless face to her mother's bruised features. The gut-wrenching pain left her speechless, her throat choked with a bitter taste. Skylar, honey," Ethan stammered, letting go of Eleanor's hair, instinctively taking a step back. But quickly, his eyes shifted, replacing the panic with his usual cold cruelty. He realized the charade was over. There was no need to pretend anymore. Tiffany was calmer. She snuffed out her cigarette in a crystal ashtray, stood up, and adjusted her slip, the smile on her lips growing more provocative. "Oh, the talented detective is home? Earlier than expected, huh? Too bad. We haven't had time to prepare a welcome party." Skylar didn't look at Tiffany. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan, her voice trembling but resonating with weight, like the sound of glass shards cutting into a heart. "Why? Why, my mother? Why me?" Ethan sneered, a grotesque, chilling smile. He stepped over the scattered cake, advancing toward Skylar, no longer holding back. "Why? Because you're too naive, Skylar. You think I loved you? A woman who buries her head in cases all day, always reeking of gunpowder and corpses. If it weren't for your mother holding a massive fortune and your family's reputation being able to help me climb the ladder, what do you think I endured you for these past 3 years?" Ethan's words were like salt rubbed into an open wound. Skylar felt the world spin. The image of her caring husband shattered, replaced by the true face of a vile gold digger. She looked at her mother, moaning in pain on the chair, at the smug satisfaction of her mistress and husband. Rage flared, consuming her weakness. Outside, lightning ripped across the night sky, and the rain poured down as if to wash away all the lies and deceit of the world, but it couldn't cleanse the stain within this house. Her wedding anniversary night had become the night her love died, the beginning of a tragedy Skylar had never dared to imagine, even in her worst nightmares. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her skin, her eyes slowly shifting from agony to icy resolve. This was no longer a home. This was a crime scene, and her life was the victim. The rage, like a slow-burning fuse, finally reached the gunpowder, shattering the paralysis in Skylar's mind. She was no longer the docile wife standing frozen at the door. The instincts of a police officer, honed through countless battles, surged powerfully, overwhelming her emotional pain. Her eyes sharpened, and in a flash, Skylar lunged at Tiffany like a cornered, wounded animal. Her movements were swift and decisive. Her skilled hand snatched Tiffany's delicate wrist, twisting it behind her back, making Tiffany shriek in agony, her powdered face contorted with pain. "Ah! Ethan, help me! This psycho is breaking my arm!" Tiffany screamed, struggling hopelessly against Skylar's professional restraint hold. But Skylar had forgotten one thing, or perhaps the pain had made her drop her usual guard. It wasn't just her and the shameless woman here. Ethan, who had stood stunned for a moment, suddenly snapped back to reality when he saw his mistress subdued. All humanity vanished from him. He grabbed a heavy, decorative ceramic vase from a nearby shelf. His shadow loomed over Skylar. A sharp, dry, brutal thud echoed. A searing pain shot from Skylar's shoulder blade down her spine, making her stagger. The blow was too strong and unexpected from behind, leaving her dizzy, her grip on Tiffany loosening. Ethan didn't stop there. He used his large, muscular body to shove her forcefully. Skylar lost her balance, tumbling onto the cold floor, sliding through the shattered remnants of the cake. The sweetness of the frosting clung to the corners of her mouth, but now it was salty with blood and tears. Skylar's head reeled, her shoulder aching as if her bones had shattered. But that physical pain was nothing compared to the bleeding wound in her heart. She looked up, eyes blurred with tears, seeing Ethan standing there, still clutching a shard of the ceramic vase, panting like a wild animal after a kill. He looked at her not with remorse, but with contempt and cruelty. Tiffany, rubbing her reddened wrist, stepped beside Ethan, hiding behind him for support, then peeked out with a triumphant smirk. She looked at Skylar sprawled on the floor, pathetic, her hair matted with rainwater and dirt smudged on her white shirt. Her voice, acrid and sharp as a razor, cut into Skylar's self-respect. "Who do you think you are, touching me in this house? A glorious homicide detective. At home, you're just a woman abandoned by her husband." Tiffany snickered, her cruel laughter echoing in the enclosed room, mingling with the chilling sound of rain hitting the window panes. She knelt, looking directly into Skylar's eyes, enunciating each word slowly, ensuring every syllable burrowed deep into her adversary's heart. "You think he loved your stiff, dry personality? Wake up, Skylar. If it weren't for your mother holding on to that prime piece of land, he would have kicked you out 3 years ago." Tiffany's words were like a bucket of boiling water splashed on Skylar's face. Prime land. So that was it. The old family mansion, inherited from her grandparents, a place filled with generations of memories. In their eyes, it was just a juicy commodity. Ethan hadn't married her for love. His tender gestures, his sweet words over the past 3 years were merely a facade to conceal his avarice. He had patiently endured her demanding job, playing the perfect husband, just waiting for the day her mother would let her guard down so he could seize the assets. Ethan seemed to have lost all patience with the women's squabbling. He stepped forward, grabbed Skylar's hair, and roughly yanked her head back, forcing her to look at the armchair. There, her mother, Eleanor, was cowering in fear, tears streaming down her swollen cheeks. She wanted to scream for her daughter to run, but the gag only allowed desperate, muffled sounds to escape. "Open your eyes and look at your mother," Ethan hissed into Skylar's ear, his hot breath reeking of greed on her neck. "I don't have time for your sentimental games. You're a cop. You know the law, right? Be smart and tell the old woman to sign the papers, or I'll show you how helpless a cop is when her loved ones are in trouble." Her hair clutched painfully, forced to watch her mother in such a tragic state. Skylar's heart felt as if it were being crushed. A wave of helplessness washed over her. She wanted to scream, to lash out and tear apart this wretched man. But her reason told her that her current strength couldn't overcome his madness. He had dared to lay hands on her mother. He had dared to strike her, which meant he was prepared for the worst. He was desperate, and a desperate man would do anything. In that moment of life and death, on the thin line between survival and oblivion, Skylar's survival instincts and detective training became sharper than ever. She realized that confronting him with force now would be suicide. She needed a cool head, she needed backup, and most importantly, she needed evidence. Skylar forced herself to suppress the agony tearing through her body, pretending to be exhausted and resigned. She slumped, allowing Ethan to grip her hair, letting out faint, weak sobs to deceive his vigilance. But beneath her mud-splattered trench coat, her left hand subtly moved, her thumb trembling but precisely finding the side button of the smartwatch on her wrist. A long press 3 seconds activated the silent SOS. It wasn't a 911 call, but a direct distress signal to the security detail assigned to her father, General Vance. On the other end, his team would undoubtedly receive the GPS coordinates and the distress signal from his only daughter. A faint glimmer of hope sparked in Skylar's heart, but she knew she had to buy time. At the same time, Skylar's eyes darted to the floor. Her phone had flown out when she fell, now lying face down near the edge of the rug, just a handspan from her right hand, its screen dimly lit. Taking advantage of Ethan turning to yell at Tiffany for more rope, Skylar subtly shifted, her finger lightly sweeping across the familiar touchscreen. The voice recording app was activated. Now, every word, every sound in this room would be their death sentence. "Ethan," Skylar spoke, her voice hoarse, a weak whisper, just loud enough for Ethan to hear. She looked up at him, her eyes no longer defiant, but filled with a feigned plea, masking her icy calculation within. "Please, don't hurt my mother. She's old and frail. I'll do whatever you want. The assets, the money I'll tell Mom to sign, but you have to promise to spare her." Hearing this, Ethan burst into laughter, his booming laugh echoing off the 4 walls, grating. He let go of Skylar's hair, dusting his hands as if he had touched something dirty. He believed she was completely broken. "That's better, isn't it? If you'd been reasonable sooner, it wouldn't have been so painful." Ethan smirked, winking at Tiffany. "See? Even a cop is just a woman. Faced with money and their life, they'll all kneel." Tiffany pouted, walked closer, and dug the tip of her high heel into the back of Skylar's hand, gritting her teeth. "Sign quickly, don't try any tricks. If this isn't done tonight, don't blame us for getting rough." Skylar bit her lip until it bled, to suppress a scream of pain. She lay still, enduring, shrinking like a small animal awaiting its moment. In the darkness of despair, the phone silently continued recording, and the SOS signal had begun to permeate the air, carrying with it the wrath of a father rushing to her aid. The real confrontation had only just begun, not with fists, but with a breathless battle of wits. Ethan's sinewy hand tightened around Eleanor's frail wrist, forcing her trembling thumb down hard onto the open, crimson ink pad on the table. Eleanor struggled in despair, muffled sobs choked behind the gag, tears mingling with cold sweat. Skylar lay there, helpless, watching the brutal scene, her heart so constricted she could barely breathe. Ethan, now completely devoid of humanity, snarled like a beast crazed by the scent of money, his eyes bloodshot with vile schemes. He raised his hand, intending to deliver another brutal slap to his elderly mother-in-law to crush her last resistance. But that hand would never reach its target. At that critical moment, a sound ripped through the eerie night, not from within the suffocating room, but echoing from outside, from the vast open air. The distinct wail of police sirens blared, interweaving from a distance, growing closer, then erupting directly beneath the luxury apartment building. The sound was sharp, authoritative, cutting through the murky fog of crime. Ethan froze, his hands suspended mid-air. He and Tiffany had barely registered what was happening when, from the reinforced glass windows on the 10th floor, powerful beams of light from specialized floodlights pierced directly into the apartment. The living room, previously a chaotic mix of light and shadow, suddenly blazed with dazzling brilliance, as bright as day. The cold, merciless white light swept across each face, starkly exposing Ethan's brutality, Tiffany's panic, and the profound pain of Skylar and her mother. Crash! The thick oak door, Ethan's pride in his security, was kicked open with a single powerful blow from outside. Splinters of wood flew everywhere, and the heavy thud of boots pounded onto the floor, urgent and firm, creating a symphony of power and discipline. Dozens of SWAT officers in black tactical gear, armed to the teeth, flooded in like a torrent. Cold, dark rifle muzzles simultaneously pointed directly at Ethan and Tiffany. Bright red laser dots danced on his rumpled shirt like the eyes of death itself. "Everyone, freeze! Chicago PD, hands up!" A sharp, powerful shout rang out, potent enough to make anyone tremble. Ethan and Tiffany were frozen, their faces drained of color. The ceramic vase in Ethan's hand dropped to the floor, shattering, creating one last jarring sound before everything descended into the terrifying silence of surrender. He trembled, raising both hands to the sky. His legs, which had moments ago stood firmly defiant, now turned to jelly. From behind the ranks of the tactical unit, a middle-aged man stepped in. He wore a crisp blue military uniform, his shoulder boards gleaming with the stars of a general under the floodlights. His face was stern, etched with the crow's feet of years of hardship, but his eyes were sharp as knives, exuding an authority that no one dared to meet directly. It was General Maxwell Vance, a living legend in the armed forces, whose name Ethan had only heard in whispered rumors, and whom he had always dreamed of meeting to seek favor. But he had never imagined their first encounter would be in such a twisted and humiliating circumstance. Walking directly behind him was Detective Ben Carter, Skylar's boss, still with his usual calm demeanor, but today, in his neat police uniform, he exuded solemnity and intense concern. His eyes swept quickly across the room, and when he saw Skylar lying on the floor with injuries, his eyes darkened, and a controlled fury was evident on his gentle face. "Officers, there must be a misunderstanding. This is a family matter, my wife," Ethan stammered, his lips trembling, trying to find some foolish explanation. But his words were cut short by an action that made him feel as if the ground beneath him had just crumbled. General Vance didn't even glance at him. He walked straight to Skylar, who was trying to push herself up, and bent down to help her. His voice resonated with the deep sorrow of a father. "I'm late, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." "Sweetheart, Dad." Those words exploded in Ethan and Tiffany's minds like a bombshell. Ethan watched, wide-eyed, as one of the most powerful men in the country gently helped Skylar to her feet, watched as the surrounding SWAT officers lowered their weapons and stood aside, their movements showing a clear deference and respect he had never seen before. The air in the room seemed to congeal, the truth laid bare, brutal and raw. Skylar Reed, the wife he had always dismissed as a regular civil servant, the woman he thought came from a modest family with only a small inheritance from her widowed mother, turned out to be the cherished, only daughter of General Vance. She had kept her identity hidden, living a simple life, enduring his contempt, all to maintain peace for her family and pursue her own ideals. Ethan felt his chest hollowed out. He had planned 100 ways, deceived countless people, but in the end, he had walked right into a trap. He had poked the sleeping dragon. He had not only beaten his wife, he had assaulted a police officer, and worse, the daughter of the man who held life and death in his hands. The regret he felt did not stem from conscience, but from an overwhelming fear of the price he was about to pay. "Handcuff them," Ben Carter ordered, his voice cold as ice. 2 SWAT officers rushed forward, tackling Ethan and Tiffany to the floor, the cold clatter of metal echoing. The handcuffs snapped shut behind Ethan's back, pressing his face tightly against the cold floor, right next to the scattered remnants of the cake he had just trampled. At this moment, Ethan's arrogant, cruel facade completely shattered. He writhed, craning his constrained neck to look toward Skylar, who was leaning on her father's shoulder. The despicable nature of a petty villain was exposed as he began to cry and beg, tears and snot mingling with the dirt on the floor. "Skylar, Skylar, please tell your dad. I was wrong. I was seduced by that woman. I was just momentarily confused, honey. We're married, Skylar, 3 years together. How can you stand to see me go to prison? Skylar, forgive me. I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll give everything back. I won't take anything. Skylar." Beside him, Tiffany also wailed pathetically, blaming Ethan for everything. "It wasn't me. He forced me. Skylar, I was tricked. I didn't know anything. Please forgive me." Their mournful, pathetic pleas echoed in the room, a stark contrast to their fierce, brutal demeanor just minutes before. Skylar stood there, leaning on her father's steady shoulder, looking down at the man who had once been her entire world. She saw fear in his eyes, but absolutely no love or genuine remorse. He only feared power, feared prison, not the pain he had inflicted upon her. Skylar's heart ached, not from regret, but from pity for herself. Pity for 3 years of her youth, mistakenly given to a monster. She had thought she would feel triumphant seeing him kneel at her feet, but now only an empty, desolate void remained within her. Revenge felt bitter. Skylar slowly detached herself from her father's arm and stepped closer to Ethan. He thought she was softening, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Skylar." But Skylar said nothing. She looked at him with the eyes of a stranger, eyes from which all flames of love had died, leaving only cold ashes. She quietly bent down, picked up the wedding ring from her left ring finger, and removed it. The simple, plain ring she had once cherished more than life itself. She dropped it in front of Ethan. Clang! The sound of metal hitting the tiled floor was dry, marking the end of a marriage tainted by calculation. Skylar turned her back, not bothering to look at him again. She walked quickly towards the armchair, where paramedics were tending to Eleanor. Skylar knelt, embracing her mother, burying her face in her frail chest. Her tears finally burst forth, hot and salty. Eleanor's trembling, swollen hand reached up to stroke her daughter's hair. Mother and daughter wept in each other's arms, surrounded by police, amidst the ruins of a family. Ethan was roughly dragged out the door. He glanced back at Skylar's retreating figure. For the first time in his life, he felt a true sense of loss. He had lost not only his freedom and money, but he had lost the only woman in this world who had loved him unconditionally. Outside, the rain still poured, washing away the dirt of the world, but it could not wash away the scars in the hearts of those left behind. Tonight, Ethan's nightmare had only just begun, but for Skylar, despite the profound pain, she knew that the dawn of truth had finally broken. The night hospital was steeped in a chilling silence, a silence not of peace but permeated with the smell of antiseptic, of life and death, and of unspeakable pain. In the VIP patient room, isolated at the end of the corridor, the dim yellow nightlight cast flickering shadows on the stark white walls, mirroring the chaotic state of Skylar Reed's mind. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, beep, beep, beep. Each dry sound, like the ticking of time, reminded her that her mother was still alive, but also simultaneously plunged her into profound regret. Skylar huddled on the padded chair beside the bed, her thin hands clasped together until they were white, her vacant eyes fixed on her mother's IV-drip hand. On the wrinkled, age-spotted skin of the 60-year-old woman were mottled bruises, clearly showing the brutal finger marks of Ethan. Her wrists were swollen and purple, the remnants of cruel knots tied with the very ties Skylar had meticulously fastened for her husband each morning before work. Skylar reached out to touch her mother's wounds, but then recoiled, as if afraid her touch would cause more pain, or perhaps afraid that her own hands that had once caressed and embraced the man who did this, were no longer worthy of soothing this suffering. Her tears had dried at the police station, but now, in this silence, they began to seep out again, not gushing like a waterfall but silently, bitterly, flowing inward, a heartbreaking sorrow. A cold draft seeped through the slightly ajar window, carrying the lingering dampness of the rainy night, making Skylar shiver. But the chill on her skin was nothing compared to the storm raging in her memory. Images of the past 3 years, slow-motion scenes of the marriage she had once been proud of, now returned like a nightmare. She remembered when she had a severe case of pneumonia, bedridden, and Ethan had taken a week off work to care for her. He had cooked porridge himself, blowing on each spoonful before feeding her, staying up all night to apply cold compresses to lower her fever. Back then, he looked at her with such deep affection. He said, "You are my whole world. Seeing you in pain hurts me 100 times more." How could those words, those eyes have been false? Then she remembered her mother's birthday last year, when Ethan had promised during a Thanksgiving dinner, in front of her whole family, that he would care for her mother and her for the rest of their lives. He had played the role of a perfect, devoted son-in-law so convincingly that her mother, who was usually cautious and discerning, had smiled with satisfaction and entrusted her daughter to him. A play! It was all just a play. The voice in Skylar's head screamed, shattering the beautiful memories. Every tender gesture from the past now turned into a sharp blade, twisting to stab her heart. He cooked porridge for her not out of love, but to ensure his prey remained healthy for continued exploitation. He was dutiful to her mother only to pave the way for his scheme to seize their assets. It turned out that for 3 years, she had lived with a venomous snake, allowed it to coil around her, warmed it, only for it to turn and bite her family to pieces when she was most vulnerable. Skylar buried her head at the edge of the bed, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. She didn't cry aloud, only muffled sobs suppressed deep in her chest. She was a homicide detective. She was trained to have a cool head, a heart of steel in the face of crime. She had confronted the most dangerous criminals, had seen blood-soaked crime scenes without flinching. Yet, in the face of her own life's tragedy, she had failed miserably. She had meticulously examined every clue of strangers, but was blind to the true intentions of the man she shared her bed with. "Mom, I'm sorry. It's my fault," Skylar whispered, her voice broken, sobbing like a lost child. Regret gnawed at her soul like acid. If she hadn't loved Ethan, if she hadn't brought him home, her mother wouldn't have endured this pain. Her blind love had opened the door to the enemy. The hospital room door gently opened, softly, silently. A tall figure entered, bringing a touch of the lonely corridor's chill, but also a strange sense of stability and safety. It was Ben Carter. He was no longer in uniform, but had changed into a charcoal gray turtleneck sweater and a long trench coat. He stood there, watching Skylar slumped by the hospital bed, his eyes behind his glasses unable to hide his sorrow. He didn't approach to comfort her, didn't utter empty words like, "Be strong or it will pass." He knew that any words of comfort now would be superfluous, even cruel, given the pain she was enduring. Ben gently placed a thermos mug on the table. The sweet, rich aroma of hot cocoa permeated the gloomy space, dispelling some of the room's coldness. "Drink this to warm your stomach." His deep voice was soft as falling leaves. "You haven't eaten since last night." Skylar looked up, her swollen, red-rimmed eyes meeting his. In that moment, she didn't see her stern boss, but simply a calm, patient man standing there for her. He didn't ask questions, didn't judge. He simply was present. His presence was like a sturdy pillar amidst the storm ravaging her soul. Skylar reached for the cocoa, the warmth from the mug spreading to her cold hands. She took a small sip. The sweet and bitter taste of the cocoa slid down her throat, soothing the bitterness on her tongue and her churning stomach. "Thank you, boss," Skylar murmured. Ben pulled a plastic chair from the corner of the room closer, but maintained enough distance so she wouldn't feel her personal space invaded. He sat down, back straight, hands clasped on his knees, the posture of a soldier on guard duty. "I've already cleared it with General Vance. You have indefinite leave until you feel better," Ben said, his eyes looking out the dark window, avoiding her haggard appearance to spare her embarrassment. "The investigation team is doing excellent work. Ethan and Tiffany won't escape. Just focus on your mom." Skylar nodded faintly. She knew Ben was taking on her responsibilities, silently cleaning up the mess her marriage had left behind. This man had been behind her for years, quietly observing, quietly protecting, never asking for anything in return. Compared to Ethan's flowery, empty words, Ben's silence was 1,000 times more sincere and trustworthy. The exhaustion from the emotional and physical shock began to set in, pulling Skylar's eyelids down. The warm cocoa and Ben's reassuring presence made her body relax slightly. She slumped her head onto the edge of the bed, beside her mother's hand, sleep hovering. In her restless, dream-filled slumber, Skylar found herself in a desolate field, surrounded by raging fire. She saw Ethan standing there, mocking her, a lighter in his hand, setting her wedding dress ablaze. She wanted to run but couldn't lift her feet. Then she felt a strong hand pull her out of the flames, shielding her from the rising embers and ash. She couldn't clearly see the person's face, only felt the familiar warm, woody scent, the scent of Ben's shirt. Ben sat there, watching the woman he had secretly loved for years drift into sleep from exhaustion. He gently stood up, took off his trench coat, and carefully draped it over Skylar's shoulders. His movements were cautious, tender, as if afraid of breaking a precious porcelain doll. He looked at her face, which, despite being pale and drawn, still exuded a resilient stubbornness. "Sleep, Skylar," he whispered into the air. "When you wake up, everything will be different. I won't let anyone hurt you again." He returned to the bench in the hallway, sat down, arms crossed over his chest, eyes fixed on the hospital room door like a silent, protective statue. Tonight, he would stay awake to guard her sleep. This was the last moment of weakness he would allow her, because he knew that when dawn broke, Skylar Reed, the resolute detective, would have to awaken. She needed to experience the deepest pain, and from those ashes, a phoenix would rise, more radiant than ever. Inside the room, the heart monitor continued its rhythmic beep, beep, beep. But the rhythm seemed more stable, harmonizing with the steady breathing of the two women who had just survived their ordeal. The dark night still enveloped them, but the seeds of revenge and rebirth had begun to sprout in that tearful sleep. 1 full month, 30 days had passed since that fateful, stormy night. For ordinary people, time is a healer. But for Skylar Reed, it was a necessary pause for her to bury her old self in the grave of the past. Chicago entered its late winter days, the sky gray, and the wind still bit through the cracks in the luxury apartment window. But Skylar's apartment today no longer held the gloomy, cold air of the first days after the tragedy. She stood before a large mirror in her dressing room, her vanity cluttered with expensive cosmetics she had never bothered with before. On the floor lay scattered strands of her long, silky black hair, the hair Ethan once praised as her gentle waterfall, the hair he used to delight in running his fingers through and caressing whenever he wanted to coax her into something. Skylar held sharp scissors, looking at her reflection in the mirror. Her waist-length hair was gone, replaced by a sharply cut chin-length bob, framing her visibly thinner face but exuding a new, edgy sophistication. She was no longer the docile, unassuming wife who kept her hair neatly tied back for cooking or chasing criminals. The woman in the mirror was now a stranger, her eyes no longer innocent and trusting, but deep, hollow, and sharp as a blade honed by fire. This morning's news from Ben Carter was like a splash of cold water in the face of justice, yet it ignited Skylar's resolve for revenge. Ethan and Tiffany had been released on bail. The reason given was ludicrously bitter. Insufficient evidence to constitute attempted murder, merely intentional assault and attempted extortion. Moreover, a shadowy force, the masterminds behind the money laundering syndicate, had intervened, hiring high-powered lawyers to twist black into white, transforming perpetrators into patients needing release for psychological treatment. Psychological? Skylar scoffed, a chilling, almost terrifying smile on her lips. They think that if the law has loopholes, they can escape? They're wrong. If the law can't touch them immediately, then I'll use their own rules to make them walk straight into their own trap. Skylar picked up a tube of deep red lipstick, the color of aged wine, of dried blood, the color of deadly allure. She slowly outlined her pale lips, each stroke meticulous and sharp. When she pressed her lips together, the face in the mirror glowed with a haunting beauty, powerful and utterly menacing. This wasn't makeup. This was her painting on the camouflage of a warrior before battle. Red lipstick was a declaration of war. From this moment on, Skylar Reed, the unassuming detective, was dead. All that remained was General Vance's only daughter, a deeply wounded woman returning to exact a blood debt. The gleaming black luxury car pulled up silently to the entrance of the Chicago Police Department headquarters. The door opened, and a pair of sharp high heels touched the pavement, their click echoing crisply. Skylar stepped out, clad in a tailored power suit that hugged her slender but commanding figure. A long black trench coat was casually draped over her shoulders, designer sunglasses obscuring part of her face. But the aura she exuded stunned the officers on duty. They almost didn't recognize their usually modest colleague. She walked down the hallway, head held high, the rhythmic tap of her heels on the tiled floor creating a sense of mounting pressure. Ben Carter was waiting for her at his office door, his eyes briefly startled by her new appearance. He knew she would change, but he hadn't expected such a complete and sharp metamorphosis. She was beautiful, a thorny beauty that made one want to gaze at her, yet fear being cut. "Welcome back, Detective Reed," Ben said, his voice still deep and warm, but with added respect. "Thank you, boss." Skylar removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp, expertly made-up eyes. "But today, I'm not here for regular detective work. I'm here to submit a transfer request to the Economic Crimes Unit, and I need your help to spread a rumor." That evening, at a charity gala for Chicago's elite, where entrepreneurs, politicians, and newly wealthy individuals converged. The glittering crystal chandeliers, the soft jazz music, and the clinking of glasses created a scene of extravagant superficiality. Schuyler Reed appeared like the queen of the night. She walked beside General Vance, her hand lightly linked with her father's arm, a perfect, distant smile on her lips. This was the first time she had publicly revealed her identity as General Vance's only daughter to the world. Her appearance immediately became the center of attention. Those who had previously scorned her as a low-paid cop now swarmed her, fawning with compliments. Schuyler responded with slight nods, but her eyes scanned the crowd, seeking the human rumor mills of high society. She knew Ethan and Tiffany weren't present, but their eyes and ears, and those of the organization behind them, were everywhere. Holding a glass of red wine, Schuyler intentionally stood near a group of wives of prominent real estate developers, women known for being the biggest gossips in the city. She pretended to whisper to a distant family friend, but her voice was just loud enough to be overheard by those around her. "Yes, Mrs. Albright, the whole ordeal with my marriage was just awful, but luckily Mom has recovered. The other day, while cleaning the house, Mom remembered an old purse stored in the attic. It turned out to contain not just some sentimental items, but also a USB drive with information about those prime land plots Grandpa left behind. Mom says it's very important, worth hundreds of millions, and it's connected to some shell corporations. I plan to take it to the bank tomorrow and put it in a safety deposit box for security." The wives, who had been pretending to adjust their jewelry, immediately fell silent. Their ears perked up. The key words USB, prime land, hundreds of millions, shell corporations acted like magnets, gripping their attention. Schuyler glanced over, seeing one woman in the group furtively pulling out her phone to text. The bait had been taken. Schuyler sipped her wine. The bitter taste spread in her mouth, but she found it sweet. She knew that once this news got out, Ethan and the forces behind him wouldn't be able to sit still. They were desperate, they needed money to escape, and more importantly, they feared that USB drive would be the evidence to send them to prison for life. Greed and fear would make people lose their reason. They would come to her like moths to a flame. Standing on a second-floor balcony, looking down, Ben Carter gently swirled his whiskey glass, his eyes following Schuyler's captivating silhouette. He felt a pang of sorrow that she had to use herself as bait, had to wear a deceptive mask to blend into this glamorous but corrupt world, but he also understood it was the only way for her to find justice. The Schuyler of yesterday had died on that rainy night. The Schuyler of today was a black rose, brilliantly beautiful but full of poisonous thorns, ready to draw the blood of her enemies. As the party ended, Schuyler stepped into her car, the night wind chilling her face. She looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the city lights recede, but the shadows of conspiracies churned ahead. She took out her phone, the screen lighting up with a message from an unknown number. "Welcome back to your world, but be careful not to fall too hard." It was Ethan. He was watching her. Schuyler wasn't afraid. Instead, she smirked, her thumb lightly brushing the screen, deleting the message. "Just wait, Ethan Blackwood. The real show has just begun," she muttered, her voice lost in the roar of the car engine as it sped into the night, beginning the hunt of the one who had once been prey. The dilapidated apartment, tucked deep within a damp, narrow alley in a working-class neighborhood where the smell of garbage mingled with the musty odor of peeling plaster, had become the reluctant hideout for Ethan and Tiffany after their release on bail. Gone were the luxurious mansion and the extravagant parties. Reality lashed them with the harsh truth of money. Bitter arguments erupted, tearing through the quiet of the muggy summer afternoon. Tiffany hurled her designer handbag, the last valuable item not yet pawned, onto the bed, screaming, "You said you could handle it. Handle what? Now we have to haggle over money for ramen noodles. Look at yourself. You used to be a CEO, and now you're hiding in this dump?" Ethan took a long, hard drag from his cigarette, smoke billowing, obscuring his haggard face, his eyes deeply shadowed from sleeplessness and scheming. He glared at his mistress. The charming, elegant demeanor of old had vanished, replaced by the gaunt, savage look of a desperate gambler. "Shut up! If it weren't for your stupidity for leaving loopholes, would we be in this mess? Our bank accounts are frozen, and the lawyers are like vultures picking us clean. Do you think I'm enjoying this?" The argument was on the verge of turning physical when Ethan's phone vibrated violently on the rickety wooden table. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the last 4 digits, all threes, made him start. He answered, listened for a few sentences, and his expression shifted from anger to astonishment. Then finally, a spark of greedy light flickered in his cloudy eyes. "What? She's planning to sell the land in Lake Geneva? And she has the USB drive?" Ethan stammered, his hand trembling as he ended the call. He turned to Tiffany. His earlier anger suddenly vanished, replaced by the conspiratorial gaze of desperate allies. "An opportunity has come. Skylar is planning to sell the ancestral land to get money to move abroad. Intelligence says she found the USB drive in the old storage room. She's holding the syndicate's vital evidence." Hearing the words USB drive, Tiffany's eyes lit up like car headlights. That was their life insurance policy, the key for them to extort the syndicate or use it to bargain for a way out. Greed and fear reforged the fragile alliance of the two guilty lovers, an alliance that had been on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, at a quiet garden cafe, Skylar sat opposite Ben Carter. On the table was a meticulously crafted fake file, complete with crimson seals, detailing land transfer deeds, and an immense asset statement. Skylar gently stirred her unsweetened iced coffee, watching the ice cubes melt, dissolving into the dark liquid, much like her heart felt now cold and bitter. "Are you sure you want to meet him?" Ben asked, his finger tapping lightly on the table in an anxious rhythm. "Ethan is a cornered dog now. He might do something reckless." Skylar smirked, a beautiful but knife-sharp smile. "Precisely because he's cornered, he'll be easy to trap. He's confident he understands me. He thinks I'm still the lovesick girl from before. I'll show him that what kills a man isn't bullets, but illusion." That afternoon, Chicago experienced a sudden downpour. In a luxurious French restaurant, where Ethan used to take Skylar for anniversaries, the cozy atmosphere with golden candlelight and soft violin music utterly contrasted with the dark intentions of those seated within. Ethan appeared in a worn but freshly pressed suit, trying to salvage some of his former charm. He carried a bouquet of deep red roses, a type of flower Skylar once loved, but now they looked like drops of fresh blood bleeding from a past wound. He approached Skylar's table, his eyes conveying such profound remorse that an outsider would have thought this was an emotional reunion. "Skylar, thank you for agreeing to see me," Ethan said, his voice low, trembling with emotion. He placed the bouquet on the table, reaching to take Skylar's hand resting on the immaculate white tablecloth. Skylar subtly withdrew her hand, the movement decisive enough to reject, yet hesitant enough to offer hope. She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, a perfectly executed performance she had rehearsed hundreds of times in front of the mirror. "Do you still have the nerve to come here after everything you've done to my mother and me?" Ethan knelt right there, oblivious to the stares of other diners. He knew that pride was worthless now. "I was wrong, Skylar. I'm a bastard, but you have to believe me. It was all Tiffany's instigation, and those mobsters forcing me. I had no other choice. I never wanted to hurt you. I truly loved you." Skylar watched the man kneeling at her feet, her stomach churning with nausea. How easily those slick lies rolled off his tongue. She picked up her wine glass, gently swirling the red liquid, which reflected a bitter smile on her lips. "Loved me?" Skylar asked, her voice soft as a whisper. "If you loved me, why did you cheat? Why did you beat my mother?" Ethan looked up. Seeing Skylar's lack of harshness, he thought the bait had been taken. He began his psychological warfare, his tone becoming desperate, pleading. "I was framed. Tiffany drugged me and recorded it to blackmail me. I was afraid of losing you, afraid of losing our family, so I had to obey her. I suffered so much, Skylar. Now I've lost everything. I just need your forgiveness. I'm ready to start over, to work like a dog to atone for my mistakes." Skylar remained silent for a long time, her eyes distant, gazing out at the rainy window. Her silence made Ethan hold his breath, waiting. Finally she sighed, a deliberately weak sigh. "I'm so tired, Ethan. My mother is confused. She insists on holding on to the USB drive we found in storage, saying it's some kind of evidence. As for the land in Lake Geneva, I plan to sell it to take Mom abroad for treatment, but as a woman alone, I don't know who to trust." The key words USB drive and sell land made Ethan's heart pound. He suppressed his excitement, gripping the edge of the table, his voice urgent. "Don't sell it so fast, honey. That land is appreciating. Selling now would be a loss. And give me the USB drive. I know how to handle it so no one can harm you. Let me help you one last time, as a way to atone for my mistakes." Skylar turned to look directly into Ethan's eyes, her gaze now deep as an ocean, containing both invitation and death. She leaned forward, whispering, "Do you really want to help me? What about Tiffany? She's still with you, isn't she?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He immediately disavowed the mistress who had shared his trials. "No, I kicked her out. I never want to see that vicious woman's face again. Now only you are in my heart." Just then, Skylar's phone on the table lit up. She had secretly activated the call forwarding feature, and the listener on the other end was none other than Tiffany. Skylar had used a hacker to get Tiffany's number and connected this call anonymously. On the other end, Tiffany heard every word Ethan said clearly. Betrayal piled upon betrayal. The man for whom she had sacrificed everything, with whom she had committed so many wicked deeds, was now casually discarding her like a used item to chase after his ex-wife and a huge inheritance. Jealousy and resentment flared like a fire, consuming Tiffany's heart, turning her from an accomplice into a ticking time bomb. Skylar smiled faintly and turned off her phone. She had successfully sown discord. The play of the heartbroken wife had concluded brilliantly tonight. "All right, Ethan." Skylar stood up, grabbing her handbag. "If you've truly cut ties with her, I'll reconsider. Tomorrow night, at 8, at the old house in Lake Geneva, I'll bring the USB drive and the land deeds. We'll talk one last time." She left Ethan sitting there, an expression of extreme elation on his face. He thought he had tricked Skylar, thought that the path to reclaiming his glory was wide open before him. He had no idea that the appointment at the Lake Geneva house was the death trap Skylar and Ben had painstakingly set. Stepping out of the restaurant, Ben Carter was already waiting in the car. Skylar got into the passenger seat, shedding her earlier vulnerable expression, replaced by a chilling coldness. She took a tissue and wiped her hand vigorously, as if to erase every trace of Ethan's dirty touch. "Did the fish bite?" Ben asked, his eyes still fixed ahead. "It swallowed the hook whole," Skylar replied. Her voice was sharp in the confined space of the car. "And the other fish is also thrashing madly. Tomorrow, they'll tear each other apart before we even lay a hand on them." The car sped off into the night, leaving behind the glittering but treacherous city lights. The hidden battle of wits had ended, making way for the most public and brutal hunt. The Lake Geneva forest rain poured down relentlessly, like a deluge, turning the red dirt road leading to the abandoned cabin deep in the mountains into a muddy quagmire. Thunder rumbled, ripping across the pitch-black night sky, momentarily illuminating the derelict, single-story house. Its moss-covered roof tiles were shattered, and patches of peeling plaster revealed red bricks like festering wounds of time. 10 years ago, this very treacherous curve had claimed the life of Skylar Reed's unfortunate mother, and tonight, fate had destined it to be the stage for the final act of the tragedy. Skylar stepped out of the car, her black raincoat covering her entirely, yet unable to conceal the chilling aura she exuded. She clutched her handbag tightly to her chest. Inside was the deadly bait, the USB drive. The wind whistled through the eucalyptus trees like the wailing of unreleased spirits. She pushed open the rotting wooden door. The rusted hinges groaned loudly, piercing the eerie silence within. Ethan was already waiting there. Under the dim beam of a flashlight placed on a dusty, abandoned altar, his shadow stretched long on the wall, distorted and grotesque. He no longer held the dignified appearance of a businessman. His eyes were bloodshot, red with ambition and madness. In his hand, he clutched a dark pistol, a weapon he had secretly bought from the black market, preparing for this final gamble. "Did you come alone?" Ethan snarled, the gun barrel pointed directly at Skylar's chest without an ounce of hesitation. Skylar calmly walked in, showing no fear. She lowered her raincoat hood, revealing her sharp face, her eyes filled with contempt as she looked at him. "I came to make a deal, not to die. You can put that toy away now. Give me the USB." Ethan shrieked, his voice hoarse with tension. "Give it to me, and I'll let you live." Skylar smirked, a smile that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. She slowly took out the USB drive, holding it between two fingers, raising it high. "You want this? What for? To run away with your mistress, or to continue living a deceitful life on the blood of others?" "Shut up!" Ethan lunged, trying to snatch it, but Skylar stepped back, still clutching the evidence. "Ethan, I want to ask you one last question." Skylar's voice deepened, echoing in the empty house. 10 years ago, at this curve, who was driving the truck that hit my mother? Was it you?" Ethan froze, then burst into maniacal laughter. His laughter mingled with the thunder outside, creating a chilling symphony. He thought Skylar was in his grasp, thought she was merely a fish on a cutting board, so he had no qualms about revealing his devilish true face. "You want to know, huh? Fine. I'll tell you so you can go to your grave and tell your mother. It was me. I was driving that truck. The old man ordered me to get that bag at all costs, even if it meant murder. Your mother was lucky not to die, but she became a cripple. I thought everything had been forgotten, but who knew her foolish daughter would bring herself to my home, giving me the opportunity to find this again." He stepped closer, pressing the gun to Skylar's forehead, his eyes bloodshot with a killer's rage. "I've endured playing the good husband for 3 years now. I'm sick of the smell of a cop on you. Now give it to me, and I'll send you to meet your mother." His confession was like the final knife thrust, severing any remaining threads of their past relationship. Skylar felt no pain, only a sense of relief. Finally, the truth was laid bare. But just as Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger, from the dark corner of the house, a shadow darted out with terrifying speed. "You scumbag! You think you can have it all to yourself?" It was Tiffany. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes rumpled as she lunged at Ethan like a crazed wild animal. Tiffany had secretly followed Ethan. She had heard the entire conversation, heard his brazen betrayal. Jealousy and greed had turned her into a desperate assailant. She wrestled with Ethan for the gun, screams and curses erupting chaotically. "Let go, you crazy bitch!" Ethan yelled, striking Tiffany's head with the butt of the gun. Bang! A deafening shot ripped through the air, tearing through their eardrums. The bullet narrowly missed Skylar's shoulder, embedding itself in the wall behind, sending plaster dust flying. Tiffany was thrown backward, clutching her bleeding head, but her eyes still glared at Ethan with hatred. Ethan panted, turning the gun back to Skylar. He had completely lost control. Now he just wanted to wipe out everything, to silence all witnesses. Die! But Skylar didn't flinch. She stood there, resolute amidst the storm, her eyes blazing like torches. She looked directly into the dark gun barrel, the corner of her lips curving into a haughty, cold smile as she pronounced judgment. "Ethan Blackwood, the show is over." Ethan was stunned, still comprehending, when suddenly, whoosh, 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 a series of powerful floodlights from all 4 sides of the surrounding trees snapped on, illuminating the abandoned house, turning night into day. A megaphone blared, sharp and powerful as lightning striking the culprits' heads. "This is the Chicago Police Department. Ethan Blackwood, you are surrounded. Drop your weapon." Ethan's face went pale, his limbs limp. He looked out the window, seeing dozens of sniper rifles pointed directly at him. From the shadows, Ben Carter led the tactical unit, rushing in like ghosts. "No, it can't be!" Ethan screamed in despair. He tried to pull the trigger in a last-ditch effort to drag Skylar down with him, but Skylar was 1 step faster. She didn't need anyone to save her. She saved herself. With a decisive and skilled move worthy of a judo black belt, Skylar dodged the bullet's path, her left hand forcefully batting Ethan's gun-wielding wrist upwards, her right hand grabbing his collar. She used her hip as a pivot, channeling all her strength and the hatred of the past 3 years into a single takedown. Crash! Ethan's entire large body was thrown, face first, onto the dusty floor. The sound of his ribs hitting the ground was chilling. Before he could recover, Skylar's knee was firmly pressed into his back, locking his movements. Click! The cold sound of handcuffs echoed, snapping shut around Ethan's wrists behind his back. The sound of justice. The sound of an end. Skylar stood up, dusting off her sleeves, looking down at the man writhing at her feet. He screamed and cursed, struggling like a crushed insect. Tiffany, in the corner, was also subdued by two tactical officers, weeping hysterically. Ben Carter walked over, placing a hand on Skylar's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride and concern. "You did well. All his confessions have been transmitted directly to headquarters. He has nowhere to deny it now." Skylar nodded. She took a deep breath, inhaling the humid air after the rain, the lingering scent of gunpowder, and the scent of freedom. She looked outside. The rain had begun to subside, revealing shimmering stars overhead. "It's over," Skylar whispered, not to Ben Carter but to herself and to her mother. The abandoned house, once a hiding place for crimes, was now illuminated by the light of justice. Police cars, sirens blaring, began to transport the prisoners. Tonight, a criminal syndicate collapsed, but more importantly, a woman had broken the chains of fate with her own hands to find herself again. 6 months later, Chicago embraced autumn. The sky was high and clear, without a single cloud. Golden sunlight, like honey, poured down onto the ancient oak leaves, stretching across the stately stone steps of the Cook County Courthouse. The atmosphere inside courtroom number 1, however, was entirely different, somber and cold. Here, the line between good and evil was sharply drawn by the resounding gavel of the presiding judge. Skylar Reed sat in the front row, her back straight, her silent dark eyes fixed on the defendant's stand. There, Ethan Blackwood and Tiffany Hayes stood, heads bowed, clad in the black and white stripes of prison uniforms. Only half a year had passed, yet Ethan looked 10 years older, his buzz cut revealing patches of white scalp, his face gaunt, his eyes deeply sunken and dark, devoid of any of the charming, elegant demeanor of the former CEO. He stood there trembling and pathetic, not daring to look anyone in the eye, especially not into Skylar's clear, piercing gaze. The judge's voice rang out, each word of the verdict echoing against the stark white walls, sealing the fate of the culprits. For a series of charges, including attempted murder, intentional assault, fraud, extortion, and money laundering, Ethan Blackwood received a life sentence. Tiffany Hayes, for her active role as an accomplice, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The masterminds of the transnational money laundering syndicate behind Ethan had also been apprehended and were awaiting their day of reckoning in another trial. Clang! The gavel struck the wooden table decisively, marking the end of a sensational case and closing the darkest chapter in Skylar Reed's life. Ethan and Tiffany were escorted to the transport van. As he passed Skylar's row, Ethan suddenly paused. He looked at her with bloodshot eyes, his lips moving as if to say something, a belated apology or a desperate plea. But Skylar didn't look at him. Her gaze swept past him, as if he were a stranger, an anonymous speck of dust in the bustling stream of life. Her indifference was more painful to Ethan than 1,000 knife stabs. He lowered his head, walking somberly to the sound of his shackles dragging on the tiled floor, the cold clatter of metal escorting him into the eternal darkness of prison. Skylar stood up, taking a deep breath. The smell of the courtroom old papers, dusty wood, and the scent of past grievances seemed to dissipate within her chest. She walked out of the courtroom, holding the divorce decree the court had just stamped. The flimsy paper was light, but it carried the weight of liberation for a lifetime. 3 years of youth, 3 years of deception and calculation, now encapsulated in a few lines of cold legal text, ended, completely ended. The grand doors of the courthouse opened, and dazzling sunlight streamed in, embracing Skylar. She squinted, feeling the warmth spread on her skin, chasing away the lingering chill in her soul. The autumn wind tousled her stylish bob, tugging at her pristine white shirt, making her feel as light as if she had shed a 1,000-pound burden she had carried for so long. She descended the stone steps, her high heels tapping a steady rhythm, no longer rushed or anxious, but calm and free. Beneath an old oak tree in the courthouse courtyard, a familiar, dusty, moss-green Jeep Wrangler was parked. Leaning against its side was Ben Carter. Today he wasn't in uniform, just a simple white t-shirt and dark khaki pants, but his rugged, steady demeanor still made Skylar's heart skip a beat. He stood there, patient and silent, just as he had always been present in her life through all those years. Not boisterous, not showy, but always the safest anchor whenever she wavered. Seeing Skylar approach, Ben didn't rush to her. He simply straightened up, removed his sunglasses, revealing warm eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. He looked at her, his gaze filled with understanding and respect. He didn't ask, "Are you sad?" Nor did he say, "Congratulations on winning," because he understood that in this emotional battle there were no real winners, only those who survived the pain to grow. Skylar walked closer to him, flashing a radiant smile, the first genuine smile after a long string of tearful days. "It's over," she said softly, holding up the paper in her hand, then tucking it into her handbag as if putting away a painful memento into the cupboard of the past. Ben nodded. He reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, a tender, natural gesture that brought a strange warmth to Skylar's heart. There were no roses, no cheesy declarations of love by candlelight, but between them was an invisible bond, stronger than any solemn vow. It was trust built from shared trials, from sleepless nights spent solving cases together, and from the boundless patience he had shown for the scars in her heart. "Let's go home," Ben said. His deep voice mingled with the rustling of leaves. "Mom's waiting for dinner. She cooked your favorite chicken soup today." The two words, "go home," sounded simple yet sacred. Home was no longer the cold, deceitful place of Ethan. Home was now where her mother, fully recovered after surgery, was busy in the kitchen with boundless love. And home also had the man standing before her now, the man ready to drive this beat-up Jeep to carry her through all the storms of life. Skylar nodded, her eyes sparkling with joy. She opened the door and got into the Jeep. The engine roared to life, crisp and strong. The car pulled away from the courthouse gate, merging into the bustling traffic of Chicago's streets. Through the car window, Skylar watched the city transform in the afternoon sun. White daisy carts lined the streets, signaling the arrival of winter. Couples held hands, strolling along the Lake Michigan shoreline. Life continued, vibrant and beautiful. She looked up at the sky, seeing a flock of birds spreading their wings, flying south to escape the cold, free and proud. The Skylar of yesterday, the weak girl who blindly trusted love, who cried and begged for love, had died on that stormy night. The Skylar of today sat here, calm and resilient. Emotional wounds might leave scars, but those very scars were proof of growth, a protective armor that made her stronger than ever. She was no longer a delicate lily in a glass case. She was a crimson velvet rose, thorny yet magnificent, blooming proudly under the vast sky. The car glided down the tree-lined road, carrying the cheerful chatter of two people. Ahead lay home, a warm dinner, family love, and a new, sincere, simple love just beginning to blossom. The sun slowly set. But it was not a fading twilight, but a transition, awaiting an even more radiant dawn tomorrow. They say you truly appreciate sunny days after going through rainy ones. Skylar once thought she had lost everything: love, faith, and hope. But amidst the ruins, she realized that collapse is sometimes the necessary beginning to rebuild a stronger self. She didn't win against anyone, nor did she need to prove anything to the world. She only conquered her past self, the girl who once feared darkness and loneliness. Now she knew the sunrise is always brightest after the darkest night. And true happiness isn't being sheltered by someone, but being able to stand firm under the vast blue sky, smile, and move forward on your own.